Hello and welcome to Speaking Scientific English. I'm Tim Skern.
And I'm Martina Deutsch.
And we're here to give you some hints and suggestions on speaking scientific English. As you can see in the first chapter of my book, I mention pronunciation as one of the disadvantages of the English language. If it's difficult for a native speaker to know how to pronounce a word at first sight, how much more difficult must it be for a non-native speaker?
Extremely difficult. The words nature and mature, for example, differ only in one letter, so why should their pronunciation be so different? Why is it that variable are pronounced in the same way, but variety is different?
Yes, there seems to be an infinite number of ways to pronounce English words. There's an interesting example. We talk about finite sets in mathematics, but infinite sets is pronounced differently.
Okay, stop. We want to help our listeners, not frighten them away. As a starting point, there are 2 audio files on this DVD that summarize the words from the list in Chapter 8.
Yes, 2 files. One is in British English, the other is in American English. Take your pick which one you want to use, but remember to be consistent.
The list in Chapter 8 suggests that you should use these words in writing scientific English, but would you also use them in speaking scientific English?
Absolutely. The more words you have at your disposal, the more accurately and the more concisely you can express your thoughts. I know from my courses that certain words such as detrimental, pertinent, feasible, plausible and putative are words that the students have problems with. I know we don't have time to talk about all the words in these lists, but I think it would be useful to talk about these words especially.
I am not surprised the students didn't come across these words. I certainly didn't learn them at school. Let's take them one by one. Detrimental means that to affect something negatively.
Yes, as in smoking is detrimental to your health.
Feasible means that something is possible, such as in the sentence, it is feasible to measure the concentration of glucose in the blood with a test strip.
Yes, that's correct. Pertinent is a word which is similar to relevant. I use it to introduce extra material that supports my observations. For example, we have seen the reaction A goes to B in E. coli. Pertinently, Smith and Jones observed a similar reaction in a different bacterial strain.
That was indeed a plausible explanation for pertinent. My supervisor always tells us that we have to provide her with a plausible explanation why an experiment did not work.
Yes, she wants an explanation which fits with all your observations and does not contradict any of the data that you produced.
That leaves us with putative. A putative intermediate, a putative precursor.
Yes, something that you propose is present, but you haven't actually yet demonstrated or you haven't exactly found any evidence for.
I hope that our explanations will help our viewers with these pertinent words. Of course, the list in Chapter 8 is not exhaustive. That's why you came up with Chapter 8.4, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. Here is Chapter 8.4. I think this is one of the most essential parts of the book.
How can a large expanse of white paper be so essential?
Because if you write down the words yourself in this part, you will be doing this as part of an active process and the words will stay with you much longer.
Do you have any suggestions of words that the listeners might want to start the list with?
Oh, of course. Let's have irreproducible, let's have tenuous, let's have spurious, let's have remarkable.
Okay, that's enough advanced words. But it is not only advanced words that cause problems with pronunciation, right?
Yes, that's true. The word occur is often mispronounced as occur. The pronunciation is occur. Why this word is mispronounced by non-native speakers, nobody knows. English teachers talk a lot about this, but we have not yet found the reason for this. Another word that is frequently mishandled is results. It is often pronounced results with an incorrect stress. It should be results. The problem is that so many people mispronounce it now that I fear the incorrect pronunciation will take over.
I have also heard you commenting about experiment and target.
Yes, I want my students to be able to explain their experiments clearly and to reach their targets in a reasonable time. There are two sounds for G in the English language, a hard one and a soft one, as you can see in the word engage.
Are there any pronunciation problems that are specific to German native speakers?
Well, of course, like everybody else, German native speakers have problems with the TH, as in clothes or mouth. It seems to me in Austria that one of the bigger problems is with the A, which all or most Austrian people want to speak as E. This is true, as in words like gate and tray and engage. It is incorrect in words like acid, activation, association, animals. Sometimes I hear the mispronunciation activated acids associated with animals, and it makes me shiver.
Some of my friends have problems with mathematical equations and numbers. Can you summarize the most important one?
Yes, you can only do science if you know about exponentials and potentials. So on the board here we see 1 million written as 10 to the 6. You can say 10 to the power of 6 or 10 raised to the power of 6 or simply 10 to the 6. Here you also see 10 to the 0, which is of course 1.
Don't you use squared for 10 to the 2?
Yes, we talk about 10 squared or 2 squared. We talk about cubes, 2 cubed, 3 cubed. We find these expressions in the square roots and the cube roots, the square root of 2, the cube root of 8, and so on. Root of 2, square root of 2, is a reoccurring number.
Powers of numbers less than 1 are called 10 to the minus 1, 10 to the minus 2, and so on.
That's correct. We can also express such numbers as 1 over 10, or the reciprocal of 10, or 1/10, which takes us into the wonderful world of fractions.
You mean things such as 2/3, 4/5, 7/10, and 15/16? They certainly give you plenty of practice for the TH sound.
Yes, that's correct. How are you on algebra?
Let's see. A squared plus b is equal to c, or equals c.
Very good. A squared plus b gives c is also possible. Let's modify the equation a little bit.
A squared minus b, a squared divided by b, a squared times b. I know we can talk about algebra forever, but I would just like to ask you how you pronounce this symbol in English.
Ah, a favourite of mine. Pi as in apple pie. But before we get carried away too much about pronunciation, remember this does not guarantee that you give a perfect talk.
What do you mean? What's your evidence for that statement?
I've had lots of observations over the years. I'm sure you've had the same.
Really?
Yes, I think that so. I'm sure you've heard some bad talks given by native speakers.
Yes, now I understand. Yes, I have watched a few of those. Sometimes the English was even incomprehensible.
Yes, English people have a lot of regional dialects which are very difficult to understand.
Such as Wayne Rooney or Amy Winehouse?
Exactly. There's a very nice story about Fabio Capello, the English football team manager from Italy, who it was not clear when he started, would he be able to speak English to the players? The journalists were very interested in his first press conference, which he gave in a very good English. Later they were surprised that when he was training the English players he needed an interpreter. And they asked him afterwards, Mr. Capello, you speak such good English. Why do you need an interpreter? To which Capello retorted, yes, I may speak good English, but the players don't.
Very sweet. I also have the feeling that non-native speakers are more conscientious in their preparation of a talk than native speakers.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen a few native speakers just throw a few PowerPoint slides together before the beginning of their talk.
With the result that they went way over time. Isn't that the worst mistake that you can make, no matter in which language you're speaking in?
Yes, I think most scientists would agree with you on that point. First of all, it's very impolite to take away other people's time. It doesn't matter if it's a job seminar or at a conference. Second, you will have shown that you cannot set your priorities, you cannot pick out the important points, and if this is a job interview, this may count against you.
What do you mean by prioritize?
By prioritize, I mean picking out the important points and removing material which is not essential, which is peripheral to your subject. I've heard many students say they went over time because it was all so interesting. But I know it's arduous. Sometimes you have to be absolutely ruthless and remove material. If you go over time, the audience will certainly not think that it was all so interesting.
But it is not only young students. Some experienced scientists don't know how to cut superfluous info either. I find this rather peculiar.
Yes, I do. I can remember a very clear example for this in a seminar at Cape Town for a professorship. One of the applicants went 10 minutes over time. When this was pointed out to him, he asked for another 5 minutes to introduce 3 further themes.
As you say, this mistake has nothing to do with language. This is true for many other mistakes that you could make, such as the speed at which you talk or the strength of your voice.
Yes, these are things that I have to remember when I speak. Before I start, I say to myself, speak slowly and speak loudly, because I have a tendency to speak too quickly and not loud enough.
A point that I find very important is eye contact. I am surprised at the number of speakers that look anywhere but at the audience, and then there are some that look at one poor member of the audience all the time.
Yes, this is very bad. Another problem is the use of the pointer. There are people who wave their hands generally in the direction of the slide, and then there are the people who make circles, concentric circles with the laser pointer. I call them the disco queens and disco kings. A pointer is for pointing exactly at the place, to underline something, to point something out, to show the audience where they should be looking.
Of course, all these suggestions won't help you if your PowerPoint slide itself is illegible. What are the most important points that you should keep in mind when making a PowerPoint slide?
I use blue lettering on a white background, 24-point Arial or greater.
Oh, that's shot out.
Yes, that covers a multitude of sins. The white background will always be white. You will always be able to read the blue lettering. 24-point Arial is big enough. Arial is a font found on most computers. This will not do anything to your symbols. And remember that if you have a nice yellow background, this may turn out dirty brown if the beamer and the computer do not talk to each other.
What about the content of the seminar? What are the most important points to bear in mind?
One should always adjust the content to the audience. Is your audience full of experienced scientists? Is it full of young scientists? Is it a mixture of experts from the field and people who come from different fields? In addition to that, there are 3 main points that you should always consider. The first point in a research seminar is to assume that the audience knows the basic methods. The most experienced scientists will know these and will fall asleep if they hear them again. There is a wonderful story from Richard Feynman which illustrates this point exactly.
And the second important point?
I was digressing as a professor. The second important point is to just transmit one idea per slide. It should be the object of your research, it should be the outcome of an experiment, it should be the conclusion. Give it a title and the audience will be able to understand your slide without any further introduction. And you will always understand your slide as well.
I think that a lot of people bear this point in mind, but then they spoil their slide by adding a figure or a table from a printed journal. I find these rather hard to read.
Yes, that's right. It's important that you do not take a table from a printed journal because they contain generally too much information. Here's a very nice example of a table which is completely impossible to read even in the printed journal. Let's see if we can simplify it. Any suggestions?
while several of the columns have the same value.
Yes, that's true. If we take those columns out, we can see that they are providing redundant information, and we can see what is actually being varied in this table.
Now it's more clear. Now you can see that L and VP30 are the variables, and the other column is the result, so the readout of the table.
Yes, and we can draw a smaller table with L on the side and VP30 on the top. Let's have a look.
And now you can see the wood for the trees. How curious a result to have 0.0. You certainly couldn't see that in the original table.
Yes, that looks very bizarre to me. I don't think it's correct, but that's not the point here. The third point in speaking that I would like to make is that it's important that you sum up your talk at the beginning to give the audience the conclusion as you start.
You mean just as journalists are taught to write, tell them what you're going to say, then say it, and tell them what you've just said?
Yes, this allows the audience to work out where your scientific journey is going and to predict which approaches and methods you might have used to get there.
That's especially important if you give one of many short talks at a conference.
Yes, or if you have to present your work or work of others in a 15-minute talk using just chalk on the blackboard. This will show that you can succinctly summarize the work of other colleagues, a very important attribute in science.
To misquote Einstein, the rest is mere details. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't need a summary slide at the end, isn't it?
Of course, you should have a summary slide which will help you to present your take-home messages. But remember not to make your summary go across 4 slides, as this will annoy the audience.
Do you have any suggestions at how the students should practice summarizing their work?
Yes, this is what I do. Without warning in my course, I ask my students to speak on their project without any preparation. This is very difficult for them. They are all very afraid, but eventually one brave soul breaks the ice and they are quite keen on doing this exercise. It shows 2 things. First of all, that they understand and can speak about their project freely. And secondly, it provides them with experience on one of the most important things of being a scientist, the ability to communicate immediately with somebody else on their subject.
What if a student just started their thesis, or if there are no results obtained yet?
No problem. They can talk about what they are going to do, what ideas they have, what methods they might use. Paradoxically, at this time, it's the most important time to talk to people and get feedback about what you want to do.
I think a lot of students are terrified by the thought of giving a talk without any notes, which is the accepted way of giving a presentation nowadays.
I know, but at least nowadays we have support in giving these talks. It was much different 50 years ago. There is a story from François Jacob about the first talk that he gave in English. He had prepared his talk on notes, but when he came to give the talk, the notes had disappeared.
Oh, so he had to give the talk without any notes?
Yes.
Poor guy.
Yes, he did. But he managed it. He must have had a very profound understanding of his project.
Did he find his notes after the talk?
Yes, he did. A friend of his had hidden them, so he would have to talk without notes.
Were they still friends afterwards?
Apparently, according to the autobiography.
Tim, I would just like to ask you how you managed your first scientific talk.
When I started, long before PowerPoint was available, I used to use small cards with the points written down on them. However, I have changed my style, and now I use the print notes option of PowerPoint to print out the talk beforehand. I write down the important points for each slide on the paper, as well as indicating which slide will be the next one in the talk. That way I'm 1 slide ahead of the audience, and that's all I need to appear really professional.
That just sounds like a script in theatre.
Yes, that's true. In England, we talk about lecture theatres. Can we take this analogy any further?
Actors and actresses rehearse, so that would be an interesting parallel to consider.
Most definitely, even if you just rehearse to find out how long you need. There is a rule of thumb that you have 1 minute per slide, but you will not know this until you have really practiced your talk.
That's especially true for people that manage to compress 4 difficult data panels into one slide.
Yes, this is a horrid development. They seem to want to batter the audience into submission.
That is certainly not something you would see in a theatre. You go to the theatre for a positive experience, and I think that a lot of scientists go to a talk in a similar mood. They want to learn something. And it is interesting how many speakers forget that people give up their precious time in order to listen to them.
Or that the audience will be supportive of a speaker because they want to learn something.
In other words, the audience is your friend, not your enemy. Of course, that might not be true if people from a competing lab are listening. Anyway, I think we covered quite a lot of ground in our little discussion. Are there any final points that you want to make?
Yes, just like in writing, you will not achieve a spoken style at the first attempt. It's important that you try out various approaches, that you listen to feedback, that you make mistakes, and that you learn from these mistakes. Finally, make sure you enjoy your moment in the spotlight.
I'll try to keep these points in mind. Dear viewer, I hope that our little discussion will help to improve your speaking scientific English. I wish you good luck. That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.